All right, we're in Luke chapter 16 and beginning with verse 1. And notice how Luke kind of groups these parables together. I think Matthew does the same thing. They have more parables, I think, than Mark does. Of course, Mark is a smaller book, but they both, Matthew and Luke, kind of put them all in the same context. Not necessarily that they were taught one after another, but this is the section on parables, we might say, as opposed to this being a point in history when he gave all the parables. But he is teaching here now. We got through the three parables of the lost and found. Chapter 15, the lost and found chapter, I call it, because that helps me to remember what's in there. And now chapter 16, he has another parable. And again, we have a little bit of a difficult parable, not as easy. You know, they're not always as easy as the parable of the sower and the parable of the tares, etc. Some of them are more difficult. But I think I have come to understand this one, at least the more difficult parts that I've looked at more recently. And so anyway, chapter 16, verse 1 of Luke, he also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a servant, or a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Now, you know, the parable is of the unjust steward, but is the rich man being fair at this point? I want to pose that question.
Yeah, he's asking a question. He's not accusing anything. He's just asking a question.
Well, now that's true. He does want to hear him out, but he says, "Give an account, for you can no longer be steward." I got the impression that his job was gone, but it may be conditioned on whether the accounting is sufficient to please the rich man.
In the banking department, they come in and do an audit. The banking department, federal, they come in and do an audit, and it's like to give an account of the actions the bank or credit union's taken, and if they are found in fault, then the manager and some of the people, even the board of directors, can be pushed aside and they have control over it. So I think that's what it's talking about here.
Okay.
Where you can no longer be steward. Now, it can also be looked at, he knows that he's doing wrong, and then if he knows he's doing wrong, he's not even going to ask him. I mean, that's just
my impression was he's accepted this report without first getting evidence, but maybe that is not the case. Maybe I'm not being fair to him. He does tell him to give an account, and so he's given him an opportunity to give an account, and so that would be fair. In other words, I want you to open the books. I want you to show me that you have that you have not been guilty of this, because whose goods are they? That's right. That's the rich man's goods, the master's goods, and so he's in control of them. He's basically a bookkeeper, maybe a little more than that, maybe a treasurer, but he's supposed to be keeping track of all that. And so he hears this, and so give an account of your stewardship. If you can no longer be steward, and maybe there is an implied condition there, if I'm not satisfied.
Let me back up, because I didn't read it until then. And so the steward now says, he's taking it from me, so I was wrong in that case. For the other side of it, and a long time ago, I used to read scriptures and say, well, what this? What it says, like Jesus knew that they were testing him.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they were testing him, and then you got to stop and say, well, the Bible's telling you ahead of time that they're testing him.
Yeah.
Well, so why am I questioning that for?
They're
testing him. So
Yeah, sometimes we draw our conclusions too soon without considering the rest of it.
If you go one more verse over it, he was taking the other guy's information.
So he knows he's guilty, but he's got to do something. So verse 3, then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I am ashamed to beg. And so he's not a ditch digger. He's not a common laborer. If you would examine this man's hands, they probably wouldn't be calloused. And so he's not. He's like a lot of people. They think manual labor is the president of Mexico, and so he can't dig. He doesn't want to humble himself to that level, nor does he want to beg. I'm ashamed to beg, and that would be a pretty bad situation to be in, especially if you're in that situation as a result of your improper use of someone else's money, someone else's goods. And so this is all his thinking. He's pretty much admitted the fault to himself, and Jesus reveals it to us. Of course, again, it's a parable. It's not necessarily something that actually happened, but could have happened. Verse 4, he says, I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, not if, but when, so he fully expects this, they may receive me into their houses. And so he's got some time here to maybe make his life in the future a little better than it might otherwise be. And so I've got to do something while I am still the steward here. They being the creditors, I think, is implied here. When I am put out of the stewardship, they being the creditors and any friends that he makes as he's dealing with this situation, as we see a little later. He wants to be taken care of. He wants a good report, and so he does this. Verse 5, so he called every one of his master's debtors, I said creditors, but debtors to him, and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Now, 50 is better than none. And so he's going to get something to settle this account, but he's getting it for his master. He's acting as his master's representative. You give me 50, and I'll see to it that the debt is settled. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? So he said 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. Maybe he's evaluated this person's circumstances, and he can see this person, he might not be able to pay the whole 100 measures, but he could pay 80. So he says, you write 80, and we'll call it square. Verse 8, so the master commended the unjust steward, because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. So it's important to notice why the rich man commended the steward. And what was the commendation? In what way did he commend him? What did he commend him for?
Sons of the world are more shrewd than the sons of light.
All right.
I take that to be that sons of light, they're not going to be doing anything wrong. And,
all right.
And the sons of the world are the ones that are shrewd, conceiving, manipulating.
Yeah. But there's also going to be a comparison here a little later that I really had to think about. But he says the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And this is the purpose of the commendation. And now notice what Jesus says in verse 9. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. So he's telling his disciples to make friends for themselves by unrighteous mammon. So what would, so in the context, when we see in verse 10, he says, he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. And so if you're an unjust steward, you're not going to be entrusted with any more than you have been entrusted. If you're just, then you will be trusted with more. Then he says in verse 11, therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? All right, now, what would the true riches be? What are true riches? Almost always in the Bible, especially in the parables of Jesus, in the epistles of Paul. What should we truly be considering riches?
Fishers of men.
Say it again.
Fishers of men.
Fishers of men. What are you going to say?
Truth. Getting to heaven when we die.
All right.
The gospel.
What did Jesus say about where a man's heart is?
That's where his treasure is also.
Where his treasure is, there will his heart be also. And so the true riches is the spiritual riches, the spiritual blessings or benefits that God will give unto us that we need to put to use in the kingdom. Now, if that's the case, then the unrighteous mammon is not necessarily mammon that you got as a result of your unrighteous behavior, but money. And so the contrast is between physical money, material riches, and true riches. And so what we need to do is use what we have in a material aspect for securing true riches. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 for the contrast that Paul makes to Timothy.
Do you think that would also be talking about if I was an unjust steward, go to the debtors that are sort of unjust and show them favors, and I could have favors in them.
That's right.
That's unjust. But if I went to a righteous debtor, they would think I'm trying to not be fair to my master.
Okay.
And they wouldn't take me in.
Okay.
Because if I came to them looking to be taken into their household, they said, well, you do the same thing to me.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just thinking, is that sort of like what he's talking about here?
Okay, let's get back. Hold that for a second. Let's look at this passage first. Then we'll come back to that question and look again at that part of that parable. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 through 19. Paul writes, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. And so it's not a matter of whether we are rich in this world's goods or not. It's a matter of how we use this world's goods. And so we should use this world's goods in such a way that we are storing up for ourselves a good foundation for the time to come, that we may lay hold on eternal life. And so to me, this represents the true riches. And so we're given material wealth to some extent or another, some more than others. But whatever the Lord sees fit to bless us with, is it really ours or is it the Lord's? It's the Lord's, that's right. As David said in one of the Psalms, the cattle on 1,000 hills belong unto God. and that's a hyperbole. The cattle on the 1001st hill is his also. But the cattle all belong to God. Everything we think we own is really God's. He's just put in our charge. He's loaned it to us, in effect. He's allowed us the opportunity to use these to glorify Him and to benefit others. Now back to Luke chapter 16. Let's see again what this man did with this, with what his master owned. Verse 5, so he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, take your bill and write 80. So the master commanded the unjust steward, because he had dealt shrewdly. Right? He was a shrewd man, which is not in and of itself bad. Christians can be shrewd businessmen without cheating anybody. And so he's not cheating anybody. Even his master commends him. And I was thinking it indicated that he took him back in, but it doesn't really say that. But again, his master has got the 50 out of the 100 measures of oil. He's got 80 out of the 100 measures of wheat. He's got something. And so the unjust steward acted shrewdly in using his gifts, his natural gifts, to get at least something of his master's debt before he's discharged. Maybe this will put me in a good light. Maybe, when I apply for another job and they call him up, and maybe he'll tell them, well, he was really shrewd and he helped me out there at the end. And so, again, he dealt shrewdly in order that he might be received in by others. It's funny how you study with one translation and you look at another translations and you don't see the same words. But he was commended because he had dealt shrewdly.
Well, that shrewdly does. It's good business practice. If you have a debtor that owes you money for a long period of time, and they're holding, what's it,
100 measures of oil, yeah.
Well, okay, you owed it to me for 5 years, and so pay me 50 and the debt's clear.
Yeah.
But I think that's what he did here.
Yeah.
It just doesn't say he owed it for a long time.
Right.
But then the master was saying, well, we cleaned these off our books and I got something.
Yeah.
And may not have got that for a long time, but I got something.
Yeah.
So he commended him, and shrewdness here may not be negative, it might be a.
Yeah.
That was good thinking.
Yeah.
You did something good there.
Yeah. Tony?
And I'm looking at it from the other side. If I'm working for you and I've done something, you told me I'm fired. It's easy for me to try to get something.
Yeah.
Because it's for you. But to me, it would be more fitting if I'm losing it. Well, I know he's losing he's already lost his job. But it seems like he's doing it. In other words, if he had lost his job, he would never be doing this.
Right.
That's the way I'm looking at it. So is his intent truly there? Or, well, just like sometimes people come to worship. Well, I'm just coming so they'll stay off my back.
Right.
So is the true intent there, or are you just doing it to, get in good graces with your master?
Yeah. And keep in mind, the master only commended him for his shrewdness.
Right.
He doesn't change his opinion as to whether he was just or unjust. When I first moved to Alabama, I had left Chattanooga. Owen Miller Brothers, somebody, Miller Brothers, is there Miller Brothers around here?
Miller Brothers, that sounds like a beer company.
Miller Brothers.
That's what I was thinking. What?
Miller Brothers in Chattanooga was like J.C. Penney's
Oh,
and Sears and Roebuck. And I had a charge card with them, and when I left Chattanooga, I owed them some money. And the first bill they sent me when I got to Alabama, I wrote them a letter, and I quoted scripture. I said, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you all." I don't really believe in bankruptcy. Now, I think there is legitimate bankruptcy that a Christian can go through, but then, anyway, two different forms. So I would never say it's wrong. But at that time, I didn't understand the distinction between chapter 7 and chapter 13, I think it is. And they were patient with me, and I got them paid off. And so, to me, that letter was kind of shrewd, as opposed to just writing that off and saying, well, if they can catch me, they can get it. But that's just being honest. And so, again, he dealt shrewdly. And then Jesus said in the second half of verse 8, "For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light." Children of God aren't always shrewd in the way they use their money. For example, Paul found it necessary to tell Timothy what he told him in 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 19. Tell them that are rich in this world is good, not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches. Some people may think, well, God has really blessed me. He's given me, $2 million, and I really thank you, Lord, for that. But he never helps anybody. Well, what good is that money going to do him in the long run? But if he uses that money to help other people, help people in need. Paul also told the Ephesians in Ephesians 4:28, "Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands that which is good, that he may have to give to those who have need." And so that's what we need to be doing with whatever God allows us to use in this life. And those who do that are shrewd, because they want to lay hold on eternal life, which was the end result in Paul's epistle to Timothy there. This fella, he may not be able to save his job, but maybe he'll find it easier to get a job elsewhere. I don't know who else the friends would be that he refers to, Jesus refers to in verse 9. "I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon," material wealth is what I think now, "that when you fail, or when you die, or maybe when you run out of money because you've been frugal, but you've maybe invested in some poor stock, maybe your 501k was lost because a company went under that you were retired from or worked for." So we don't know what could happen to our material wealth. But if we are using it properly, we won't really have to worry about the end, which is an everlasting home. So we need to follow the principles laid out in the New Testament when it comes to money, and we won't have to worry about whether we're going to heaven or not. We demonstrate where our heart is by the use of our funds and what we really treasure. Do we treasure this material wealth, or do we treasure a right relationship with God and doing whatever is necessary to maintain that? To me, that's the contrast here that he's making. This man is shrewd. Children of light, sons of light, are not always so shrewd. Oftentimes they waste their money. They trust in uncertain riches, and so they don't use it properly.
We have to look at the beginning here. It says the steward was wasting his master's good.
That's right.
Now, it never gave the little thing here says squandering his master's good. It doesn't. I don't make you think that he was taking it for his personal use or whatever, but he wasn't. It's like the talent. He wasn't using it wisely.
Okay.
It wasn't for the better interest of his master. So he may have been lending more things to his debtors, or he may have been making unwise loans. We don't know. We don't explain that part.
Yeah.
He just says he was squandering his goods so that his master wouldn't have any goods later on.
Yeah. Maybe he was not pressing them hard enough to pay off their bill. I do get the impression, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, he was not always shrewd, but he became shrewd when his job was threatened. He was shrewd enough to see the handwriting on the wall finally. Well, he didn't see the handwriting on the wall. He heard the voice of his master. But he realized he's going to have to change his practices. He's going to have to do something that he hadn't been doing. And so at least he gets, in one case, 50%, in another case, 80% of what his master was owed. So his master's got something rather than nothing. And that's the only thing he's commended for. All right.
There's a time in business to be fair.
Yeah.
And be honest. Then there's a time when all that goes to a side and you look at the individual and you take a chance with them. And then there's a time when that individual you just go, I'm sorry. I said, you have put yourself in a situation where you're not showing you're not faithful. You're not honest anymore. Yeah. So you have to be honest with them. And then people get mad with you for not doing business with them because it's your fault, not theirs.
You know, at the paint store over the last 15 years, there have been many regular customers who would run up their paint bill and their supply bill and just keep charging and charging and charging, and every now and then they'd make a payment, but it'd just be a pittance as compared to what they owed. And then PPG would finally say, okay, from now no more credit until you get this paid off. Then they'd start paying cash because we could take cash from them. And I remember one fellow coming in and he says, well, I would buy more, but y'all apparently don't want my money. And I'm thinking, well, it's not that we don't want your money. We do want our money. And I didn't say that to him, but that's what I'm thinking. And sometimes PPG would just write it off. And so, okay, or maybe they'd take him to court, depending on who it was, what their circumstances were. And I just don't understand this idea of saying, I'm not going to pay you. Now again, I'm not sure which is which. Chapter 7, chapter 13. You probably know. I may even have the numbers wrong. But one of them, you agree to pay it off, and you declare bankruptcy, but you agree to pay it off, and somebody is an administrator, I think, and helps you pay that debt off, as opposed to the other, which you're cleared. You don't owe nobody nothing legally, and I have a problem with that. But I would give people the benefit of the doubt if I hear the word bankruptcy.
According to the circumstances.
Yeah.
If you owe, sometimes you can get yourself in a bind where you can't pay anybody off, and you're still working and everything.
Yeah.
Your bills you're making $500 a week, but you owe $700 a week. So,
yeah.
So you file wage earner, and the banks or the courts will say you'll pay this much, and you're under court protection, and they get the money from you.
Yeah.
So the other one is that you went to the hospital and it would cost you bill rent $200,000, and in your lifetime you couldn't pay it off.
Yeah.
So you file bankruptcy to relieve that debt.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that file bankruptcy numerous times.
Yeah.
To wipe everything off.
Sometimes just to get out from under car payments.
Get out of the bill, yeah.
Heard of one fellow declared bankruptcy, and then he went out and bought a new car.
Yeah. Because he got a lot of credit then, because he owns it.
Yeah.
But he ain't gonna pay that off either.
That's right.
You think that would be on your record? I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like it.
It's on your record you file bankruptcy, you don't owe nobody, but then for the next 7 years, you can't file bankruptcy again.
Right.
So you owe money now.
Yeah.
But you got a new car.
Right. All right, so verse 10. He who is faithful in what is least, to me, that is the material wealth that God has put under your control. Or in the, verse 10. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. So the Lord knows that, all right, he's been responsible in his handling of this money. All right, I will bless him and his efforts, and he'll have more. In other words, it's kind of like a 2-talent man properly using his 2 talents, and God saying, all right, I'm going to make you a 5-talent man. And yet here's the 2-talent man that is no more responsible than a 1-talent man. Okay, you're going to be a 1-talent man from now on, or maybe even a 0-talent man. And so God rewards you. And then at the end of verse 10, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. So the Lord knows your character. And anybody who knows your what you've been doing in this regard, they know your character too. Your character kind of speaks for itself. And so it's hard to gain a position of more responsibility when you haven't met the lesser responsibilities that you've already been given. And so responsibility needs to be rewarded. Irresponsibility does not need to be rewarded.
And I can also see the intent now of this guy too. You know, a lot of people think, well, if I've lost my job, I ain't gonna go try to collect anything for him. That's not, that's his problem.
Yeah.
But you almost see like maybe he repented and he's doing, like I said, the right thing now and try, hey, I don't have to do this, but to show you what kind of heart I have, I'm getting something, for this man.
Yeah. And again, he'd be more likely to get another job if at least his former employer can say, well, he is very shrewd in the way he does business. All right, verse 11. Therefore, here's his application. If you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, the physical material wealth, who will commit to your trust the true riches? He's not going to bless you spiritually if you've been irresponsible in these material riches. And that gets back again to what Paul wrote Timothy. Don't trust in uncertain riches. That's what some people do. That's where their treasure is, and so that's where their heart is. But if our treasure is in heaven, then we're going to do whatever we can to please God, knowing that that's the only way we can go to heaven, pleasing God even with with the money He has seen fit to bless us with. And that's not an ulterior motive. That's just being responsible for the right reason. Verse 12, and if you have not been faithful in what is another man's. Now the steward here, he was unfaithful in what belonged to his master at first, but then he became at least shrewd and to some extent faithful because he did act in his master's best interest there at the end. If you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? And so God has put certain things, given us abilities, given us responsibilities, given us wealth, given us a good job, a good paying job, given us a good wife, a good husband. If we treat these things with respect, emphasis on the husband and wife there. If we treat these things with respect, then God's going to bless us spiritually. And so we can't hardly afford, we can't afford, not hardly about it. We cannot afford to treat with disrespect anything that the Lord has given unto us by His providence that can be used for spiritual purposes if we use it for anything else. Then he says in verse 13, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. Now, I used to think that he was saying the same thing twice, but he's not really. He's reversing the order of them. The one that's hated in the first half is being loyal to in the second half. The one that is loved in the first half is being despised in the second half. And so you can't do that. You can't try to serve two masters. You can't do it because oftentimes their wills for you will conflict. And so we can't serve material wealth. We can't afford to. We can serve God and use our material wealth responsibly and then obtain those true riches after a while. And so mammon here again is wealth. I used to think when I was a kid that meant the devil, which would be true still, but it means riches. If you've always got dollar signs in your eyes, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be concerned about money. Certainly we should be. But if we're looking out to gain material wealth for the sake of gaining material wealth, then that's a problem. And we need to be careful of that. That whatever we do, however we serve God and others, it's so that we can improve our service to God and that we can improve our service to others.
Isn't it in Proverbs where it talks about labor not to be rich?
Yeah, I think it does. If it ain't, it ought to be. I think it sounds like it's something in there like that. I was texting a friend of mine today. She was telling me how busy she's been lately, and I said, well, your mind is not the devil's workshop. She said, I ain't never heard that before. I said, I've heard the idle mind is the devil's workshop all my life. I said, but your mind is not idle. And she found it in the book of Proverbs.
I found it.
Okay.
Proverbs 23:4 says, labor not to be rich, cease from thine own wisdom.
Cease from thine own wisdom?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that's the wisdom of man.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we need to cease. Yeah, we need to cease that.
I've heard people say, the money doesn't mean that much to me. I just need to work.
Yeah.
So, you can pay me less than what you're paying everybody else because the money's not the important thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what God's telling us. So there's other important things other than money.
Yeah.
And it could be doing the right thing, helping out a friend, or just not having so much you squander.
Right.
Maybe you don't know how to handle your money.
Right.
So too much will lead you down the pathway.
That's right. And one preacher I knew, when he moved to a congregation there in Alabama, one of the men said that the church will keep him poor, I will keep him humble. So he won't get the big head. And too often, more often than not to be, churches seem to have the intention of keeping their preacher poor. But maybe that's not the rule, but the exception to the rule. All right, verse 14. Well, let's stop there. It's 16 minutes till. So we'll stop there and pick up with verse 14 Sunday morning.